Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to call to order the October 2nd, 2015 special board meeting of the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And we'd like to have Dr. Joe Liu lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Will everyone please rise, face the flag, ready, begin.
America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now you can continue.
Do any of the board members have any opening comments? Does the executive director have any opening comments? Was that a no?
Actually, sorry about that. Actually, I just wanted to note for the board and the audience that we had a couple of very minor things relative to two of the board items. For agenda item number 28, which is the minutes of the special meeting of the Stationary Source Committee, Dr. Liu asked that we just clarify one of the comments that he made, so that's on the blue sheet. On the green sheet for agenda item number 34 pertaining to amended Rule 1106, we've using some new computer software, and when we did a conversion of a file, a few words were dropped in a response to a comment. So we're just simply filling those words back in. And that's it.
Mr. Weiss, can you tell me on which items, I know I'm skipping over a couple items here, but can you tell me on which items we have conflicts on the consent calendar? Because we only have 7 board members here, and if we have any conflicts at all, and if we have multiple conflicts, then waiting for one person's not going to do it.
Right. Dr. Burke, it's items number 6, and you just need one more board member. Item 7.
Wait. 6 has one board member?
I'm sorry, Dr. Burke. There's a conflict with one of the board members who's present. So if you get another board member attending.
Yeah, I'm looking for those that we have more than one board member on.
Okay.
And if you give me these numbers, then what I will do is hold those items, and we'll take those when Mr. Caccioti gets here.
Oh, here we go. Mayor Polito's here. There we go.
Hey, a little applause. Yay. Oh, we got Mayor Polito. Yay.
But normally he sits right next to me, so where is he?
What happened? They moved your seat?
They moved you
They
over?
moved your seat? Okay.
Dr. Burke, the only item then is item
None of the items have multiple conflicts?
only number 15.
Only number 6 has multiple
I'm
conflicts?
sorry, 15.
15? Okay, then we will hold. Who is conflicted on 15? You say 15?
I'm sorry. 15 is fine. We're good on 15.
So we're good on everything?
Yes, we are.
Should we announce our conflicts now?
No, we got to swear in Clark first, okay? So we'll call Dr. Parker to the microphone that doesn't exist.
It's going to be a wonderful day.
Yeah, it's going to be a good day, good day. Good day today. How you doing? No problem.
Should I bring my little?
No, we'll share.
Just repeat after him. It's just like getting married. You're fine. I do hereby bequeath.
I do. Everything that I own.
I, and please state your name,
I, Clark E. Parker, Sr.,
do such times as I hold the above office,
during such times as I hold the above office,
do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear that I
will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California,
to the Constitution of the United States and to the Constitution of the State of California.
very good, that I take this obligation freely
That I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Congratulations and welcome back.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah, so I will recognize Vice Chair Yates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the board elect Dr. Burke to a new term as Chair of the Governing Board beginning January 15th, 2016. I next move that the board elect Ben Benoit as Vice Chair of the Governing Board for the term beginning January 15th, 2016.
I'd second the motion.
Okay, is there any objection to a unanimous roll call? Hearing none, that item is unanimously approved, and I'd like to thank my colleagues. And Mayor Benoit, would you like to say a few words?
Only that it's an
That's
extreme,
enough. Thank you very much.
thank you very much, there we go.
No, go ahead.
I have a short speech that's no. Just that I've got some big shoes to fill. Mayor Yates, you've done an excellent job, and it's been an honor working with you. And I know you're not leaving yet, but thank you for nominating me, and I'll be proud to step into your role. Uh-oh.
Dad wants to know if he can,
Yes,
he can get bossed around by his son.
yes. Oh, absolutely.
John, are you resigning?
What'd you say? I missed that. What'd you say?
He's resigning.
I'll give that some thought. No. I'd just like to say it's a distinct honor and privilege to serve on this board and then to have my son come on. I remember when he came to me and said, I'd like to serve on the board, and I said, well, how does that work? And he says, well, for the cities, they elect. And I said, really, how are you proceeding? He said, well, I've got 17 cities have already, so what are you coming to me for, you know? And now, to have him move up, it is an honor that's difficult to describe, to have your son move in this kind of fashion, and to have, you know, if you can picture, you know, having
Well, I
really
gotta tell you, Supervisor, the apple does not fall far from the tree.
well, thank you, but
And
yeah.
I know if he were my son, I would be very, very proud. And I'm looking forward to working with Ben in the near term. So
we have a great time, and as he's grown and had a chance to have some of these conversations, I mean, you can just imagine the Sunday morning that you can sit down with your son and have a long, emotional, exciting discussion about reclaim.
Not something we figured we'd be talking
No.
about.
Thanks to all my colleagues for recognizing Ben in this fashion. Thank you.
thank you for bringing him to this board. Okay, items 1 through 16.
If I may, I need to announce a couple of conflicts. I need to recuse myself from items involving contracts with those who have made charitable donations to my employer, the Coalition for Clean Air, and therefore I am recusing myself from agenda item number 7 because Gladstein, Neandros, and Associates is a potential source of income which is materially affected by this item. In addition, I am recusing myself from agenda item number 14 because the Better World Group is a potential source of income which is materially affected by this item. Thank you.
We have speaker slips on item 2, so we will be pulling item 2. Is there any other item? Yes, sir, Supervisor.
Thank you. Supervisor Benoit, I will recuse myself from item number 6, having received political contributions from CCNR. In item number 15, I can participate, but I am required to announce that I am also a member of the Coachella Valley Association of Governments Board, which is involved in this matter.
I also need to announce on item number 15, I am involved in the city of Waldemar to some capacity, so I have to not recuse myself, but just note that I'm involved with that organization. They also have some money coming out of item 15.
Is that it? Supervisor, anything for you? On 15, we're okay still. We're good, okay. Well, let's take the testimony on 2.
Should we vote on the rest?
Okay, I'll accept the motion on the rest.
I'll move the agenda.
Second.
Any opposition? Hearing none.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I do have a question for staff on item number 7.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Question for staff on item number 7.
7? Sure. Okay. We're pulling 2 and 7. Would Angela Johnson-Masaros come to the microphone on item number 2? Is she here? Okay. Curtis Coleman, you're next up to bat, and then Sue Gornick.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. My name is Angela Johnson-Mazaros. I'm with Earth Justice and also speaking on behalf of the Natural Resources Defense Council this morning. And I just want to urge the board to continue forward with the adoption process for the reclaim rule. While we do still have a little bit of difference with the staff about the final proposal, we believe that the rules should stay on track, should be set hearing today, and should be heard by this board and voted on at the November 6th meeting. Thank you.
Curtis Coleman on behalf of the Southern California Equality Alliance. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We're not objecting to the setting of the rule for a hearing today. We recognize there's a lot of work that we have to do in the next month before the November 6th hearing, and it is our plan to work closely with staff as cooperatively as we can to try to resolve the outstanding issues. And this matter, I believe, is coming before the Station and Resource Committee again in October, and we will let the Station and Resource Committee know of the progress that we have achieved and if there are still issues remaining at that time. So, thank you.
Is Sue Gornick, there you are.
Hi.
I knew I saw you earlier.
My name is Sue Gornick with the Western States Petroleum Association. Following the Special Stationary Source Committee last week, several issues are still unresolved. Both WISPA and the Industry Coalition that we are a member of have concerns regarding the size of the shave, the cost-effectiveness methodology and BART assessment, the legality of the district's proposed methodology, the selective dismissal of the district's third-party engineering analysis, and the aggressive implementation schedule. One paramount discrepancy is the district's failure to estimate the total cost of the proposed shave of 14 tons per day. Currently, staff has estimated the shave of 8.8 tons per day for barked between $623 million and $1.1 billion. No costs are being attributed to the 5 tons per day beyond that barked requirement. The Health and Safety Code requires that the reclaim program will not result in disproportionate impacts as compared to command and control. We believe that the real cost to the refining sector alone is over $2.2 billion, and this was a survey completed by Stillwater Associates, hired by WISPA. And staff has said a shave of 8.8 tons per day only achieves a small amount of real emissions reductions, and the rest are paper reductions. But we don't agree with that you need 14 tons per day of RTC reductions to get 8.8 tons per day. In fact, in 2005, during that market adjustment, it mandated a 23% reduction in RTCs, and we got a 24% reduction in reclaim emissions. If the shave only includes the reductions required by BARC, staff says that it won't comply with the law. The Health and Safety program, the Health and Safety Code requires the reclaim program to result in an equivalent or greater emissions reduction at equivalent or less cost compared to command and control. The 5 tons per day shave beyond BARC proposed by staff is in addition to what will be required by command and control. This calls into question how the district's emissions reduction methodology could comply. WISPA has been an active participant in this rulemaking. However, there are still significant issues to be resolved, especially with the cost and size of the shave. We remain fully committed to work with you and the district collaboratively to achieve an outcome that can be supported by all stakeholders, as we did in SOX and the Coker rent rule. And we seek your support to ensure the unanswered questions that remain are addressed before bringing this rulemaking to the board. Thank you.
That concludes the testimony on item 2. What's the
Mr.
pleasure?
Chairman, I'll move item 2.
Second.
Any opposition to this item? Hearing none, we're moving on to item 7. Supervisor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On item 7, we are amending contracts for outreach and assistance with the vouchers. Some pretty sizable amounts. I'm wondering if those are contracts we put out to bid or if they're amendments to existing contracts. If so, when were those contracts bid?
Henry Hogo with staff. Supervisor, these are existing contracts, and they were awarded by the board back in December of last year. We didn't anticipate such a high interest rate in the program. We have close to 2,000 applications at this time. The 3 consultants that are listed here that we're requesting the board to approve today will refocus their effort not on outreach, but on case management. So they're going to handle the 2,000 applications that we have existing. We're asking AARB for more money to continue the program into next year, and the focus will be on case management, but not on outreach. Because we believe we have an approach to getting people interested in the program based on the interest that has been expressed so far.
So the previous contracts for December, were those outreach specific, or were those also case management, we're just adding to it?
It's both outreach and case management, but the focus at that time was we didn't know how to attract people to the program. So the awards at that time were to do both outreach and case management. But the assumption was that we will only do between 550 to 900 applications.
And the contracts in December were competitively bid?
Yes, they were.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, I'll move the item.
There's a motion and a second. Is there opposition to this item? Hearing none, this item is approved. Item 17 through 23. What is the pleasure of the board?
I'll move the item.
Second.
Mr. Chairman.
Any opposition to those items? Hearing none, those items are approved. Items 25 through 31.
Move the item.
Second.
Any opposition to that?
Just want to make sure that errata sheet gets adopted as part of that motion, please.
Okay. Is the maker of the motion?
Absolutely.
Okay. The seconder of the motion? That is, then there's no opposition, then that item is approved. Okay, item 32.
This is Philip Fine here, Deputy Executive Officer, AQMD. I just want to give a very brief, I don't have a PowerPoint, just a very brief description of where we are in terms of the white papers. I don't know, there may be some testimony today. So essentially, this is coming towards the end of over a 16-month process with many working groups on all these different white papers. There's been over 39 working group meetings over that period. And then, as you know, at the last board meeting, we released 8 of the white papers in draft form to get one last month of public comments and testimony perhaps here today. We will be taking the testimony today, hearing from the board, and we did get some letters over the past week or so there may be some other minor changes to the papers, and we'll be finalizing them in the next week or two. As I mentioned, over the last week or so, we got 6 or 7 very late comment letters. They were mostly supportive of the process and supportive of the concepts in the white papers, and they were primarily encouraging us to follow through on some of those concepts as we move into the development of the AQMP. And other comments were about making sure we do a full cost-effectiveness analysis and make sure everything's feasible with an eye towards making sure we have a vibrant economy. So with that, I'll answer any board questions.
Thank you for the presentation. We have a number of speaker slips on item 32. The first of which is Rita Loof, the second of which is David England.
Good morning, board members. Rita Loof, Director of Environmental Affairs for RADTEC International. The RADTEC Association represents over 800 members nationwide involved in UV, EV, LED technology. Our products can be found in a multitude of industries, including graphic arts, medical devices, fingernail polish, 3D printing, and marine coatings. Energy-curable materials do not cure by the evaporation of solvents. The process involves a photochemical reaction where the coating remains a liquid as long as it's not exposed to the energy source. Once exposed, it instantaneously cured in a matter of seconds. There are virtually no emissions. I really support the white paper concept. I think staff has done a very good job putting them together. I wanted to especially thank Aaron Kassenstein for his hard work on this. I participated in the white paper committees, and we really support the vision articulated in the white papers and hope that it comes to fruition. Mobile sources are identified as the major contributors to the pollution problem in the white papers, but yet the stationary sources have seen very little regulatory relief. It has been business as usual for stationary sources. If most of the emissions are coming from mobile sources, then why are our businesses still being subjected to very overly prescriptive regulations? Stationary sources seem to get all the sticks, whereas mobile sources get the carrots. There's a real cost of compliance. Our members are not in the business of record keeping. They're in the business of innovating and creating new products, many of which can be found in our smartphones. Many of our members are global companies who may look to other states or other countries as alternatives. This board has recognized the air quality benefits of UV-EV technology and included exemptions in Rule 109 and 219, as well as awarding RADTEC with a Clean Air Award. We support added incentives in the form of decreased record keeping and permitting for facilities who have gone above and beyond district requirements. We urge you to continue to support pollution prevention technologies by ensuring that the vision outlined in these documents is implemented where it counts in the district rules. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yes.
When listening to you give your talk, your speech, I think it's worthy of noting that mobile sources are really not really within the germane itself of this district per se, because as you know, it's really controlled by CARB to a large extent. And I think we as a board have voiced our concern that many of these sources that we should have more control over, we don't. The ones that we do, it's not that it's being burdened on the stationary source, but the mobile sources itself, we are constantly asking for wider and more discretion in that area. And to the extent itself, Dr. Wallerstein, I see you're getting up to leave, but
he's back.
I think that the public, and I'm really saying this is because many of the people probably here, most of you are really experts in this area of environmental air quality. But I don't know if the general public really understands that we really don't have the whole gambit itself of discretion and mobile sources. Maybe you may want to comment from a technical standpoint of view as to exactly what that means.
Good morning. Dr. Parker, you're absolutely right. When we look at the National Ambient Air Quality Standards and what we have to do in our region to meet the standard for surface level ozone or summertime smog, as well as fine particulate, we know that the chief goal that we have is further reducing oxides of nitrogen emissions, and that the majority of the NOx emissions comes from the mobile source sector, and that our ability to meet the federal clean air standards, including the one that was promulgated yesterday, is by and large dependent upon what the State Air Resources Board and the US EPA do to control NOx emissions from mobile sources. So that will be the emphasis in the 2016 Air Quality Management Plan. What Rita is, I think, highlighting is that as we pursue any additional VOC controls, or at times when we open up our VOC rules, that we should provide incentives to those types of coatings that produce extremely low emissions to no emissions, and we've done some of that in the past, and she's just encouraging that we continue to do that, and I think we're going to hear from her a little later on Rule 1106 in that regard.
Yeah, I'd like to just comment. We've had this discussion a few times, and I was pleased to see this morning's story in the LA Times. Mr. Wallerstein is quoted as saying that we need the federal government to step up to the plate. We need the state government to step up to the plate. We need them to recognize and either handle or delegate the ability to do something about the mobile source side of this component, because we're going to continue to be in this box for a long time, and it's going to get tighter and tighter and tighter until we get that authority and an understanding of where we need to move. So I'm very pleased that our comments here at the board level were reflected in Mr. Wallerstein's comments today on the new standard that was in the LA Times.
Then, thank you, and I assume you're David?
Yes, sir.
Okay, your name for the record.
Good morning, Chairman Burke and members of the governing board. I'm David England, representing the LA County Business Federation, BizFed, on behalf of 272,000 employers with 3 million employees throughout LA County, and also on behalf of the Regional Business Coalition that we organize. And as you know, we've been engaged in the white paper process since its inception, and we're happy to see that all but 2 are completed now. That doesn't necessarily mean we endorse the contents of the white papers, but we appreciate the relationship that we've built over the last couple of years with Dr. Wallerstein and his staff, and their efforts to make sure that we have a seat at the table in the process. But now that the white papers are coming to a conclusion, we look forward to moving on to the AQMP and to reviewing and commenting on the draft control measures prepared by both the district and ARB. As you know, ARB just released its mobile source discussion draft on Wednesday night, and SCAG is still finalizing its RTP SES. So it's obvious to us, and perhaps to many of you, that the original schedule for the AQMP will slip. Therefore, as staff works to prepare and release draft control measures, we urge you to ensure that any tighter schedule still includes sufficient time for stakeholders, in particular those employers who will actually bear the costs of complying with the AQMP, to thoroughly review and comment and provide feedback. And then finally, we just want to reiterate our request that the draft socioeconomic analysis be released at or very close to the same time as the draft AQMP. And again, this is to ensure sufficient opportunity for stakeholder review. We appreciate all of staff's work on this, and look forward to continuing to work with you all to end up at an outcome where we can both protect our clean air and our economy. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. This concludes the testimony on item 32. If I could. Yes, Supervisor?
I have some comments. Thanks for the reading. It was helpful with the insomnia on some nights. I learned a lot reading them, but I was disappointed to not have a little bit more meat. It seemed like in many of them we were saying the same things over and over again, and I understand that, but I think a lot of folks look at these and we're hoping that they would get some real guidance and direction about what the control measures are going to be. So I know there's still a great deal of anticipation about what the details are and how we're implementing this. I noticed one issue throughout, not an inconsistency per se, but in the blueprint, we talk about the technologies have already been developed. Things have been developed. This is a matter of increasing commercialization and getting them to market. But then in several other papers, and I can give staff the specific later, we seem to be talking about we need to go out and develop these things. And I think we need to be clear that if the technology has already been developed and our focus is on getting them to market, then this board's priority needs to be accelerating commercialization and providing those incentives. And if that's the case, if that's where we are on this, then we need to make it a priority going into our next budget cycle, that's going to be a funding priority for this body. And that may mean having to look at some of the other programs and other things that we do to make sure that the majority of our resources are getting to increasing that commercialization and readying for deployment. To that end, I think it's also important this board consider adopting some principles to guide the actual control measures that are coming forward. I had been hoping that's what I would see more of in the blueprint document, but I didn't see there quite as explicitly as I would like the kind of things that I think we should consider. And I don't think that today is necessarily the time to do those, but I would like to see it be a discussion of this board. I think we need to have spelled out in the blueprint the assumptions that this board would like to see included in all of the white papers and in all of the control measures, and that those are assumptions that then become measurable and tracked, so that as we need to adapt, we are tying it back to principles that have been approved by this board. So the assumptions, the focus on our budget. I'd also like to see us adopt some specific principles about this board's understanding that land use authority remains with cities and counties and is not going to be usurped by regional bodies. I would like to see us make a statement, and I think we'll talk about it with at least one of the items later on the agenda, not leaving business with stranded costs, that they be able to amortize investments that they're making to implement these policies in a reasonable amount of time, and that there's consistency between how our reports and our assumptions amortize and how the businesses are actually able to amortize before we put new rules and regulations on. Those numbers need to be the same on both sides. We need to be very clear and explicit about the balancing of air quality and health needs with the economic considerations. If we are taking a movement, not just being an air quality agency, but being a public health agency, then we have to be as concerned with the public health implications of all of our policies. And that means that we focus on the health implications of poverty, because they are significant, they are real, they are incredibly poignant in the region that I represent. And so much of the policy that's going to derive from these white papers needs to take that into consideration. And of course, the comments that have been made already about the federal government's role in this. If we can't get the mobile sources addressed by the folks who have the authority to address them, our region is never going to achieve compliance, and our folks are going to continue to have a diminished quality of life. We need to make it a priority of this agency to figure out how we communicate with the business community and with planners at the local levels, how to get jobs near where the people live. That reduces vehicle miles traveled. That contributes more to a good economy and to good health and to good public policy more than anything else that I saw in newspapers. And that needs to be a governing principle of the AQMP and of everything we're doing here. So I'd hope we have the opportunity to discuss those and other contributions from my board members further and have those assumptions and principles guide the rest of this process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
It's really interesting. I was talking to Supervisor Nelson about the ramifications of getting jobs located near to transportation hubs. I told him I thought it was the best idea I'd heard in 20 years. And I've been trying to get him together with my daughter, who sits on the Transportation Committee in the Assembly. And I know that Autumn was trying to reach him earlier this week to see if we couldn't get some kind of legislation put in place so that the tax incentives for that kind of program can be put together. And I think that once you do that, then the development of the program becomes much easier. But I totally agree with most of what you said.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Sure.
Thank you for letting me know my assembly member is doing such good work.
Hey.
Based on Supervisor Rutherford's comments, it reminded me that at one point we had one gathering several years ago of investors and technology developers, and we brought them together and we had them talk. I remember learning a lot about technology at that and learning a little bit about investment. I would think that we might consider having another one of those events where we could bring together the people who invest in these technologies and the people who build and maybe even the people who use these technologies, and to encourage the commercialization of low-polluting, high air quality technologies. One thing that I did mention to staff, and I would like to mention to my colleagues here on the board, is when I was talking to a terminal operator last year, he mentioned that their company went out on a limb, invested in shoreside power, retrofitting ships, and then they had this prospect of a much less costly option of emission capture technology on those ships, kind of undermining that big investment that they made and putting them at an economic disadvantage. So if there is some way for us to figure out a way to make sure that those companies who take those risks and do what we ask them to do don't end up losing out when a newer, cleaner, less expensive clean air technology comes along and they're put at an economic disadvantage. I thought that was a really insightful comment and one that I think we need to pay attention to in terms of not incentivizing people to hold back and wait for the last minute before they come into compliance or before they take any risk of adopting a new clean air technology. And the last thing I just want to say is that when we talk about what's good for business and what's bad for business around here, I think ultimately the worst thing for business is non-attainment and facing those federal sanctions. And so we have to work together to make sure that from an economic standpoint in 2024 and 2032 and now 2037, we're not facing federal sanctions and a federal implementation plan and all those things that would be not only horrible from an air quality standpoint, a public health standpoint, but also because those actions that the federal government would threaten and potentially take against us would be absolutely horrible for business. Thank you.
Any further comments by any other board members? Hearing no further comments, what's the pleasure of the board?
Move the item, Mr. Chairman.
Second to receive and file.
Any opposition to that? Hearing none. It's moved. Okay, item 33.
Morning, governing board members. My name is Susan Nakamura, Director of Strategic Initiatives and Planning and Rules. I will be presenting proposed Rule 1420.2, emission standards for lead from metal melting facilities. So proposed Rule 1420.2 applies to metal melting facilities that are melting more than 100 tons of lead annually. There's 13 facilities that staff has found that are subject to proposed Rule 1420.2. They include battery manufacturing facilities, solder manufacturing facilities, aerospace facilities that are making lead dyes or casts, and scrap metal and a steel mini mill. So these sources were previously regulated under Rule 1420. Rule 1420 was adopted in 1992 and hasn't been amended since. We're updating all the requirements for the lead facilities consistent with the policies that were established in Rule 1420.2 with tailoring of the rule for the lead metal melting facilities. Proposed Rule 1420.2 will ensure compliance with the 2008 lead NAAQS, which set a standard of 0.15 micrograms per cubic meter averaged over 90 days, and will also ensure and place safeguards to ensure that people that live and work around metal melting facilities are adequately protected. We can't underscore enough the health effects of lead. We've talked about this a lot in Rule 1420.1. It's a neurotoxin. It affects interferes with the development of the brain. There's health effects that apply to children and adults. For children, it affects the nervous system. You can have decrements in IQ, learning disabilities, behavior issues. Recent studies are indicating that some of these health effects are not reversible. For adults, there's increase in blood pressure, decrease in kidney function, other cardiovascular diseases, and also that lead is a probable human carcinogen. So the approach for 1420.2 is that it's a layered approach, and through the working group that we've established that an approach that's additional requirements would be on an as-needed basis. And so the first layer represents all the requirements that all facilities would have to comply with. So under the proposed rule, all facilities would be required to conduct ambient monitors. They'd be required to meet ambient limits of the rule similar to Rule 1420.1. They would have to operate within a building enclosure. There are not requirements for negative air except for one facility, the largest facility. They would have to meet point source requirements, 99% control efficiency. Rule 1420 established 99% for PM, 98% for lead. We're establishing a 99% for lead. And then also implement a series of housekeeping and maintenance provisions that were similar to 1420.1, but modified and tailored to this source category. So the second layer is only required if the facilities hit triggers, and it's a submittal of a compliance plan. And the compliance plan represents contingency measures that the facilities would need to implement in the event they exceeded certain ambient levels. And these contingency measures will be focused on where the foreseeable exceedances could occur. And the triggers are based on two ambient standards, of 0.12 micrograms per cubic meter beginning 2018, and then July 2018, and then, or 2016, I'm sorry, and then 0.1 micrograms per cubic meter in April 2018. We also have an emission rate limit, not if they're over 0.08 pounds per hour, that we want them also to submit a compliance plan. So measures in the compliance plan would not be required to be implemented unless they hit another set of triggers. So the compliance plan would be held by the facility and would be ready to implement in the event there was further exceedances. And so the triggers for the compliance plan are tied closely to the limits in the rule for the ambient standards and are at 0.15 and 0.10 micrograms per cubic meter. We had worked with the working group, and they had asked for the 0.1 micrograms per cubic meter to allow 3 exceedances of that. Then they asked again that the 3 exceedances be over a rolling 24-month period, and so we've added that into the proposed rule. Additional measures would be implemented if there were additional exceedances or on an as-needed basis. So 1420.2 really reinforces what some facilities are currently doing. We have facilities that have well-controlled lead emissions. We have facilities that are implementing good housekeeping provisions that are already meeting the provisions of the rule. We have facilities, all but one facility is currently operating within a building enclosure. So staff worked with a stakeholder working group. We had 6 working group meetings. We've met with each individual facility. We've had multiple meetings with individual business representatives, and we've made over 40 revisions to various elements of the rule. And at this point, we feel that we've made, as we make changes, we still, unfortunately, still have key issues. But we want to highlight that the core requirements that we have in the rule, they still remain intact. The ambient limits, the requirements for monitors, total enclosures, housekeeping provisions, but there's still issues that remain. So what are the issues that remain? So as of last week, we understood that there were 3 issues that remain. And the 3 issues were the need for proposed Rule 1420.2, and the second issue being pre-approval of alternative housekeeping measures, the third issue being the frequency that a facility should conduct their sweeping and cleaning operations. Yesterday, I received another additional set of comments from the Battery Council International, raising 4 new issues. And so the 4 new issues that were raised were that we've allowed them to provide alternative housekeeping provisions. We've identified the objective of each measure. We've identified how they measure the efficacy of the measure. And they're saying, as you measure the efficacy of the measure for housekeeping provisions, remove the frequency. Remove that as a test. And so we'll talk about that concern. And then the next issues 5, 6, and 7 really relate to the primary cause and how you determine an exceedance and what happens in terms of using the definition of primary cause in terms of how you move forward for additional requirements under the rule. So the first issue in regards to the need, the issue by the Battery Council International is that they've commented that the rule's not needed, but if there's all the issues can be resolved, then they can live with the rule. But I think it's important as we talk about the need for the rule to really understand what we have in Rule 1420 and our current understanding. So as we look at 1420, a 23-year-old rule, it established an ambient concentration of 1.5 micrograms per cubic meter. Since that time, there's been over 6,000 health studies, environmental studies, that have studied the health effects of lead. And many of these studies are pointing to the adverse effects of lead occur at much lower levels. And so this information, EPA used this to lower the national ambient standard tenfold from 1.5 micrograms to 0.15 micrograms in 2008. In 2015, our board adopted or amended Rule 1420.1 for the large lead-acid battery recycling facilities, establishing the policy for ambient limits at 0.1 micrograms per cubic meter. So back 20 years ago, point sources, that was the primary concern. That was the focus for lead. We now know, looking at monitors at the large lead-acid battery recycling facilities, we know from monitors at 2 of the facilities that are affected by the rule, we know by wipe samples that it's not just the point sources. We need to focus on the fugitive emissions. Fugitive emissions are a significant source, and we cannot underestimate their potential. The focus in 1420 was on air dispersion modeling, that facilities can use air dispersion modeling to demonstrate that they wouldn't need to put in ambient monitors. We now know that ambient monitors are the tool of choice. Ambient monitors will measure the point, the fugitive, all emissions coming from the facility and capture the ambient concentration of lead. So, proposed Rule 1420.2, we have to acknowledge, we cannot ignore all this information. We have to, the current understanding of the health effects of lead, we have to update this source category to ensure compliance with the 2008 lead NAAQS. We need to begin monitoring. This rule is needed because we need to monitor at these facilities. So we know what lead concentration is at these facilities. We need to update the housekeeping provisions. We need to control the fugitive lead dust. We know that it accumulates on surfaces. We know that that accumulation can become airborne. We know that it can enter into communities. We know we need to establish good housekeeping provisions. We know that we need to reduce the potential of lead to protect the community, and then we also want to provide the consistency of what the board adopted in 1420.1 to this second series of lead rules for 1420.2 sources. So I just wanted to highlight in terms of some of the policies that we adopted in 1420.1 and how we tailored them for the lead melting facilities. So when we talked about the monitoring frequency, facilities will all have monitors, but instead of daily, these facilities will do monitoring in 1 and 6 days. When we talk about total enclosures with negative air, under 1420.1, all facilities, under 1420.2, all but one facility. So of the 13 facilities, 12 will only have to put a building enclosure and will not be required for total enclosure with negative air. In regard to the ambient limit of 0.10 micrograms per cubic meter, we have a later compliance date. Roof cleaning, we've reduced the frequency of roof cleaning. In terms of triggers to implement the compliance plan, it was 1 exceedance under 1420.1. 1420.2 says 3 exceedances over a 24-month period. And then for an off-ramp for monitoring, it's not allowed under 1420.1. We allow for 1420.2 an off-ramp if they can meet 0.07 micrograms per cubic meter, modeling and emissions demonstration. So going into the second key issue in regards to alternative housekeeping provisions is that the comment is that the executive officer should not have to pre-approve an alternative housekeeping measure, is that the facility should on their own be able to decide if the measure meets the objective and the effectiveness. And so in part of the comments that we received from the Battery Council International is that essentially they want to self-regulate. The Battery Council has commented that regulated entities, this is a direct quote, would run the risk that their judgment of the adequacy of the alternative would not be upheld. But the concern is the community. It's what happens to the people that live around those facilities when the judgment was for a faulty housekeeping provision. They're the ones that will run the risk, and they're the ones where their health risk will be affected. In terms of the third issue, in terms of the sweeping frequency, Battery Council has commented that the sweeping of paved areas should be weekly instead of once per operating shift. And so Rule 1420 includes a provision that requires weekly cleaning. This is a 23-year-old provision. If we decide we want to maintain that 23-year-old provision in status quo, but then we would be ignoring all the information that we have about these facilities and everything we know. And so let's highlight about the battery manufacturing facilities. Battery manufacturers, they melt a high volume of lead. They average melted for the 6 battery manufacturers is 3,400 tons. The 2 largest battery manufacturers, they melt over 7,000 tons of lead annually. And then what do we know about the ambient concentration? We have a source-oriented monitor at one of the battery manufacturers that melts more than 5,000 tons per year of lead, and this facility has well-controlled point sources, and they've shown in the past that their ambient concentration could be over 0.15 micrograms per cubic meter. And so if their point sources are well-controlled, where are the emissions coming from? These emissions are coming from their fugitive sources. There's a multitude of areas where fugitive sources can escape outside the facility. Outside from an enclosure, an opening enclosure, vents from an enclosure, storage and transport where you have the potential for fugitive lead dust, foot traffic as employees walk outside of an enclosure, vehicle traffic as different parts of materials are being moved through the facility, and also point sources. Even though point sources may have a 99% or higher percent control, you still have lead particulate that will land on surfaces. And so where do these go? They land on rooftops, they land on surfaces surrounding the facility, on pavement, they land in communities surrounding facilities. And yes, we have a facility, when we look at the proximity, that's literally shares a wall with their neighbors. So of the 5 out of 6 of the battery manufacturers, there's 5 out of 6 have residential communities or a school within 1,000 feet. One manufacturer has just shares a wall and is adjacent to their residence. So adding it all up, why are we asking for sweeping once per operating shift? We look at the high amounts of lead that's being melted from these facilities. Average 3,400 tons per year, highest to 7,000 tons. We look at the health effects of lead. It's pointing to telling us that the health effects are occurring at much lower levels. Our knowledge of fugitive emissions, we've had monitors, we have wipe samples that show even a well-controlled point source will still have fugitive emissions that will cause ambient concentrations that will be elevated, and the proximity of residents to sensitive receptors. So to us, it adds up. Clean the paved surfaces that accumulate lead dust once per operating shift. Weekly would not be sufficient. The fourth issue. So this is one of the issues that we received yesterday in regards to using an alternative method to clean paved surfaces, that they want to modify the criteria, and the criteria should no longer have a frequency. So staff's concern is that if you eliminating the frequency would allow a facility to clean their paved surface less than weekly, monthly, bi-monthly. There would be no criteria when they substitute a measure. Less frequent cleaning of paved surfaces can result in greater accumulation of lead dust on these paved surfaces. And we have the wipe samples that show they do accumulate on these leads on surfaces outside the facility. The next three issues are relating to issues that they've raised in regards to primary cause and how that would be incorporated into the rule. BCI is concerned that facilities will be cited or must implement the compliance plan when other sources of lead have caused the occurrence. We've added a provision in Proposed Rule 1420.2 when they raised this issue. We added a provision that would allow them to demonstrate that another source was the source of the exceedance. We provided that to them. And then they come back and they ask for more. So they're asking not only for this, but to open up the definition of primary cause, to the point where the definition of primary cause would disavow the responsibility even if the facility is 99.99% responsible for the exceedance. BCI is seeking to basically indirectly increase the ambient standard to say, take out the background. And we already incorporate the background in the standard. That's how 1420.1 was established, and that's how 1420.2 should be established. The next issue is BCI wants an indefinite time frame for facilities to demonstrate that they are not the primary cause of an exceedance. When we added the provision in 1420.2 to address the primary cause, we set a deadline of 5 business days for them to submit the information to the district for the executive officer to make the decision whether or not they were the primary cause. And we need to set a time frame. We need to set a deadline to ensure that we can timely implement the compliance plan, ensure that information is submitted in a timely fashion. This allows us to do prompt investigations and gather the evidence that we need. And then the 7th issue that BCI makes in their concern is that they want to make it more difficult for our agency to require implementation of the compliance plan. And BCI's proposal would allow the facility to violate the ambient standard without being required to implement the compliance plan, which that would prevent additional violations. So I just wanted to summarize is that to emphasize in terms of the health effects of lead, and that lead poisoning, it is a preventable disease. And proactive measures, they're needed. What we're proposing in Proposed Rule 1420.2, they're reasonable measures. We've made many modifications to the rule, to the proposal, in terms of frequency, in terms of the various requirements of the rule. And and we've tailored the provisions where we've made policies in 1420.1 to these sources. We've reduced the frequency, we've reduced we've extended the time frame in which they have to make these requirements. We've even modified in terms of what needed to be in the compliance plan, looking at only just the foreseeable, where you could foreseeable have an exceedance. But in the interest of public health and protection, staff is recommending that the bar not be set too low, that we really consider all this information together as we move forward for proposed Rule 1420.2 in your decision. So staff's recommendation is to adopt the attached resolution, certify the environmental assessment, and adopt proposed Rule 1420.2. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We have a number of speaker slips here. So we'll start with David Weinberg. And then Ismail Pedroza, is it? Will be after Mr. Weinberg. Your name for the record, sir.
Excuse me 1 minute. I think I just left my notes on my chair. Bear with me 1 moment.
This is something we said?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and panel. My name is David and members of the board. My name is David Weinberg. I am legal counsel to the Battery Council International. I believe you have requests to speak also from Mr. Pedroza, from Trojan, from a representative of Ramcar, and from a representative of U.S. Battery. They are all our members, and I understand that they are comfortable with, if you will be agreeable, allowing me to use most of their time. I know Mr. Campbell personally would like to make one statement. I would hope I could have a little bit more than 3 minutes in light of the half hour.
So you'd be speaking for
all the BCI members who are 4 companies in the district.
Can you give me their names?
Yes, U.S. Battery, Trojan Battery, Concord Battery, and Ramcar. And I believe all but Concord have submitted forms to you today. I don't think Concord is here.
Okay, great.
But I would hope we could have a few more minutes than just the typical 3 minutes.
You've already used half of yours up, going through all that baloney.
Okay, got it.
In your agenda package for your 2012 adoption of Rule 1420.1, it said that secondary smelters are the only stationary source category that has the potential to cause non-attainment with the EPA set NAAQS to 0.15. That was in 2012. Nothing has changed. I don't minimize concerns, and they are appropriate, with the proper handling of lead. The issue here is the appropriate level of regulatory activity for this board to deal with sources which are not a cause of an exceedance of the NAAQS. We have worked hard with the staff, and I want to compliment them. We have some disagreements. They seem to think that every time we propose a different approach to try to accommodate their concerns, we have come up with a different issue. That is not the case. The Battery Council represents 98% of the lead battery manufacturers in the United States, and 4 companies here in the Los Angeles area that employ about 700 people, mostly Latino and minorities. We don't think the core elements of this rule are sensible, but we have agreed to accede to them, to accept them. And by that I mean the core elements, I mean the 3 key core elements. One is enforcement of a standard that is lower than the scientifically valid standard adopted by U.S. EPA at the advice of its CASAC committee, both because it has a shorter measurement period and because it is a 1/3 lower figure. The second is to install monitoring data. monitoring equipment, which will cost $80,000 to $100,000 per facility first year. And the third is for the total enclosures. Now, we have asked for a number of changes to be made to the original rule proposal that was surfaced last December in recognition of the fact that our members are willing to live with this. And the issues come down to two things. One is micromanagement of companies for which there has been no showing of a contribution to the exceedance of the NACs. And the second is that they have a defense available in the event that there is a measurement. And let me talk about those two standards. May I continue, sir? Let me talk about those two things. We don't believe that battery manufacturers should be held responsible if there's a measured exceedance that's the result of background evidence or work or something that is done by another company. For example, a company shouldn't be penalized if the background air levels, such as the 94% of the lead in the air that your data shows come from airports, compared to the 0.25% that comes from lead battery manufacturers, if there are other causes of the exceedance. Our concern could be resolved by inserting a very clear definition of what primary cause means into this regulation. You just heard from staff, however, that they don't agree with that. In fact, I had thought until the presentation we just heard that perhaps the staff hadn't focused on this as much as they obviously have. The final offer that they made to us and the language that is in the proposed rule to you is that you're not responsible if you are you're not liable if you're not the primary cause of the emissions. Well, that's fatally ambiguous. And it's ambiguous for the reason that Ms. Nakamura just said. A facility that operates itself to keep its air lead levels below 2/3 of the NACs, 1/3 lower than the federal NACs, may well be the source of most of the emissions that bring it up to that 0.100 level. Even if there's another source that is the straw that breaks the camel's back and puts it over. We've said, give us a chance to prove that, and don't hold us responsible if we will do that. The staff responded with language in the staff report released a week or so ago with a definition of primary cause that says the most significant contributor. Well, that doesn't solve the problem at all. That ducks the issue. So we have given language, and I did give it to Susan within the last several days, saying, let's have a but-for test. If the issue is there would be an exceedance, not be an exceedance, but for something we can show, don't impose these additional burdensome requirements on these 4 battery companies. The second issue has come down to a question of how often sweeping occurs at these facilities. Sweeping of parking lots, not sweeping of internal areas. We're talking about sweeping of the parking lots, sweeping or vacuuming. Our members have long prioritized protection of their community. 2 of my member companies here have operated since the 1920s. They are family-owned businesses. Their employees are their families. If you want to talk about impact on the community, talk about impact on those employees. And the assumption underlying this rule seems to be that they're trying to skirt the requirements.
Take another minute.
Thank you, sir. There's no data showing that battery plants are the cause of any problem. The sample data to which Ms. Nakamura referred, for example, about the exceedance at one battery plant, was an exceedance of the 0.15 level when the standard adopted by this board was 1.5. Since the federal government lowered the standard to 0.15, even though this board had not yet caught up with that rule, but since the federal government lowered that, there hasn't been an exceedance of the 0.15 anywhere, including that one facility to which she referred. Nonetheless, when the staff wouldn't, and so we've got a micromanagement problem. We've got facilities that have been operating well, that are doing almost everything that the staff has thought up to add to this rule and make it mandatory, who say they shouldn't have to have a permission slip from the executive director if they come up with something better. And the executive director says, no, you have to run it by us. Trust us. It could be an email. We'll tell you whether it's okay or not. And then they say, but on this vacuuming your parking lot, do it every shift. That's 3 times a day for some of these plants, rather than once a week. There's no suggestion whatsoever that so much lead dust comes up in these factory parking lots in the course of a week that sweeping once a week is not adequate. The fact that you put a measurement on a vent that's been operating for 20 years and you find lead at the vent, even though the point sources are regulated, even though the facility has been in compliance, doesn't prove anything about why you need parking lot wash down or vacuuming. So regrettably, very much regrettably, I'm here today to ask you to reject this rule. Because our view is, even if the principal elements of this rule are misguided, and we believe they are, our clients can live with them. But they've got to compete with about 90% of the battery supply in the United States coming from companies outside of Los Angeles, who are not held to those requirements anyway, and of course with increasing volumes of foreign competitors. And if they can meet those requirements, they should be allowed to go about their business. And that's the reason that we ask you to reject this bill. Now, I did say, I believe none of my members other than Mr. Campbell wanted to say something. He wanted to make a very brief statement. And I appreciate very much you giving me the extended time, Mr. Chairman.
It's our pleasure. Would David Pettit please come to the microphone? I thought I saw David here. There he is. Morning.
Good morning, Chairman Burke and members of the board. I'm David Pettit from NRDC. I'm here to support staff's recommendation on this rule. I just got back from another trip to China, and for those people who think that your board is too tough on industry, I would invite anyone to go and live in Beijing for a couple weeks, breathe the air, and come back here and say that, oh yeah, everything's great over there and that's how you should handle things. What it sounded to me like the previous speaker was interested in is a race to the bottom, where his clients can be just as dirty as people outside of the district and outside of California. I think that's a terrible idea. When it comes to public health, there's no safe level of lead, none. And as Susan mentioned, the lead that comes out of the stack or that blows off the parking lot or is from any sort of fugitive source, it doesn't just go away. It goes into the community. It goes into the homes that are near these facilities. And we all know what happened in the homes around the Exide facility. DTSC now estimates there are 10,000 homes affected by that. DTSC is now working with Quametco to do the similar kind of soil lead testing that we've seen in Exide, and I'm willing to bet what they're going to find in that situation. We just can't have that. We cannot afford the public health risk, especially to children in this area, that the risk that is brought about by any level of lead escaping these facilities. If it were up to me, I would go farther. It's not up to me, it's up to you. And so I strongly urge you to accept the recommendations of staff for this rule. Thank you.
Would Rob Kramer please come to the vacant microphone? Is he here? Not here. James Westbrook?
Good morning, Chairman Burke, members of the board. I'm James Westbrook with Bluescape, representing Senior Aerospace in Burbank, California. Senior operates an ancillary low-temperature remelt lead kettle for making lead punches utilized in the fabrication of aerospace parts. Based on the properties of the lead in the operation, it has very low and insignificant point and fugitive emissions. Senior supports the AQMD in protecting public health. It's a primary concern of their company. But this rule is unfair and unreasonable to Senior and similar lead melting operations. Low lead emitting facilities have been grouped with smelters and battery manufacturing. This is arbitrary, and these facilities don't belong in this rule. Based upon the EPA's AP42 emission factors, the emissions of smelters and battery manufacturers are thousands of times higher than the type of operations that my client Senior Aerospace has. And that would include fugitive emissions. The types of things you saw on the chart with all the different things that happen with fugitive emissions just don't happen in this operation. It's a very low use of space, a very limited area of operation, and very well contained. There's no grinding. There aren't a lot of fugitive sources at this facility. The proposed rule provides a 100-ton applicability threshold and a 50-ton per year exemption threshold in 1420.203. The threshold is arbitrary and based on a single site and assumes 1/2 the value is safe. The calculated health risk with the operation has not been determined in the staff report, and there's no comparable exemption available based on the risk. It's just an arbitrary threshold, 2 arbitrary thresholds. So monitoring for all lead melting operations, especially with a very low point and fugitive emission rate at any cost, is unreasonable. District staff may say if emissions are already low, why aren't you worried about doing the monitoring? That can exempt you from the monitoring. So do monitoring to avoid monitoring. Does that approach make any sense to you? Of course, that monitoring comes with additional costs too. We believe the board should delay rule adoption for better information on resources and costs for monitoring, to allow more time for companies to train to do the monitoring, to establish the exemption based upon modeling and source test, and delete the monitoring requirement for the exemption, the relief exemption 1420.02b, and also establish with real science an equivalent emission level or risk threshold for the 50-ton exemption. What the board should really be asking is, where do we draw the line on monitoring the district? Is it with 1 chemical, 2 chemicals, all toxics, or all compounds? Establishing it for this rule alone based on district's lack of confidence on other methods is arbitrary unless the district does this for all rules. Thank you very much.
Would Angela Johnson-Mazaris come to the vacant microphone?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm Angela Johnson-Mazaris with Earth Justice, and I am here to strongly support staff's proposal for Rule 1420.2. You've already heard from staff about the compelling harm caused by exposure to lead, so I won't talk about that much. But I will just note that lead is special in that if you breathe it into your lungs, And if it gets to the bottom lobe of your lungs, it's absorbed 100% by the body. And we know that this toxin not only stays in the body of the person who absorbed it, but it is quickly and efficiently transported to a fetus. It's important that we take all possible steps to ensure that we limit exposure to lead. I just want to say quickly two things about, in response to what's been raised here today. First, we know that the NAC's monitoring levels is not the most important thing to think about when we're thinking about exposures to lead. It's not our only concern and shouldn't be used as a touchstone or a threshold for considering what are appropriate levels of lead emissions. Staff has called these measures basic core measures, and that's exactly what they are. They're basic, they're core, they're not excessive. Over the years, I often am frustrated by staff's cautious approach to regulating emissions in this air basin. I believe here staff, again, has taken a cautious approach and is asking for minimal protections. Finally, I just want to comment on the housekeeping. Listening to the conversation about sweeping and if we should do it once a day versus, or 3 times a day versus once a week, reminds me of a conversation that I have routinely with my 12-year-old son. He thinks that he should shower once a week. I think he should shower once a day. We all know that basic housekeeping is important, and you have to do it on a regular basis to ensure that you're protecting your health, and in this case, to ensure that we're protecting community health. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. James Somolia? And behind him, could we please have Mark Olson come to be next in line?
Good morning. James Simonelli, California Metals Coalition Executive Director. We're a statewide organization representing metal manufacturing. 4 of our companies are impacted by 1420.2. First off, I do want to wish you a happy National Manufacturing Day. Today is National Manufacturing Day. The California legislature also passed a resolution. Today is California Manufacturing Day as well, where we open our doors to the public so they could see what we do. I do want to thank staff as well for their openness to not only meet with us, come to our facilities, but to have dialogue on this issue specifically. Our organization, the California Metals Coalition, we do support the goal to reduce lead. We support the goal to protect public health. We support the goal of reducing to the 0.10. We do believe that the board should not underestimate how much it's going to cost and the time and the effort it's going to put to reach that goal, but we believe it is a goal that will protect public health. At the same time, I think you're going to hear again that the requirements, the prescriptive requirements of housekeeping, we would like some flexibility, and a lot of it does come down to cost. Putting a worker 4.5 stories up on your rooftop, and granted it's not just once every quarter or once every twice a year, it also has to do with if there's an interruption or an upset in your facility, and so that person has to go up and do that. There's also requirements of plant life, what you can have in terms of trees, where you can have trees, the size of the landscaping you can have, and the question is do those need to be prescribed in order to protect public health? When we have ambient air monitors at 0.10 that you have to require by. And for staff to say that we might implement something that would actually put us at risk, put the public at risk, the monitors are there, and the district has the authority to put more monitors. And so in your dialogue after our public comments, we would like you to consider the issue of housekeeping and ultimately the cost. We are an industry that has not recovered from the recession. We have not recovered. You look at the data since 2007, and you look at the people we employ, and California is concerned about the middle class, we're at risk. Our workers are at risk. You have union jobs. You're going to hear from a union shop after me. And it's important for you to try to find that balance, and ultimately that's what we ask is when you look at the cost, you look at the requirements of the rule, for us to ask for some flexibility on housekeeping is something we think you should consider. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Olson? While Mr. Olson is testifying, could we get Cliff Crow to get in the queue?
Good morning. Good morning, honorable governing board members. My name is Mark Olson, and I'm Vice President and General Manager of the Gerdau Steel Mill in Rancho Cucamonga, California. We are the only steel recycler and seismic rebar manufacturer in California. We have reviewed the most recent version of Rule 1420.2 dated September 25th, 2015, and we support the rule in its current form. We respectfully request, however, that no last-minute changes be made, since any change could jeopardize our ability to comply with the rule in anything other than its present form. We greatly appreciate staff's willingness during the rule development process to meet with us and discuss the objectives and proposed control strategies for the rule. With the governing board's action to adopt Rule 1420.2, Gerdau now has the certainty it requires to commence the financing process and construction of an anticipated $50 million environmental control system and other environmental improvements, which would make the Rancho Cucamonga Steel Mill one of the cleanest, if not the cleanest, steel mill in North America. We expect, with a sizable investment that this is, that it will take approximately 25 years to pay back this investment, but we are willing to move forward. Again, thank you for your time and attention, for working with us so well, and on behalf of the men and women that rely upon our facility, they also thank all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Cliff Crow, come to the microphone.
Mr. Crow is one of the, from Ramcar Batteries. He's willing to let me have used his time. You also have a card, I think, from Mr. Pedroza. He also was allowing me to use his time. I believe Mr. Campbell, who submitted a card, does want to make a statement, however.
Okay, thank you. Douglas DeLong. How about Carol Kaufman?
I'm for 34, not for this one here, so.
You're for 34, and you're right. Thank you very much. So that concludes the testimony on 33.
Mr. Chairman, I think they were mentioning that Mr. Campbell wanted to still address the board on this.
I can't hear you, Dr. Lawson.
Mr. Campbell wants to address us. Is Mr. Campbell out there? Come on down.
No, I didn't have a card for him. Did you fill out a card?
Yes, I did.
And your name for the record?
My name is Terry Campbell. I'm from U.S. Battery Manufacturing, Corona, California.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think that, I'm speaking on behalf of my company now, not as a member of BCI. I think our company, at its essence, agrees with the idea that 1420 needs to be changed. It is a very old rule. It is time that it be changed, but it needs to be changed to something that's manageable and meets the goal. I think there are a couple of provisions, two of them with our particular company, that we would like to have addressed by the board, and if we could get by those two particular items, we would probably be in agreement with it, 100%. The one thing I do want to say is that I don't like the mischaracterization that my industry, and specifically my company, doesn't care about public health and the communities around them. I've worked at the company that I work at for almost 30 years. The people that work there are my friends. I've been to their weddings, their kids' graduation, all kinds of things. We are a small family. And for someone to suggest that I want to poison them, well, I don't know about all of you, but I'm not in the habit of making my friends sick. And my friends live just outside of our plant. So I'm not going to be interested in doing anything that's going to jeopardize their health. Again, I think the rule is a good one, but there are some things in here that limit what we need to do. One of the things is we would like to expand our business. We want to get into Asia. We want to get into Africa. We want to get into Latin America. But when you start constricting people with rules that may or may not meet the goal, and in our estimation, they don't meet the goal, that limits our resources to do those things, which means we can't employ more of our community. And so I would encourage you to really consider this. My ideal scenario in this is to go back and try, and I know staff has been extremely good about this. I can't say enough about the AQMD staff. And I know it sounds like it's prolonged, but if we could just hammer out one or two small details, we would have a deal. And it would work out great, and it would meet the goal. It would protect public health, give us the business advantage that we need to continue to compete, and I think everyone would be happy. So I don't know how you do that. I don't know what that process would be, but if we could do that, I think it would be advantageous to everyone. Thank you.
Card that, who put in a card who I haven't called? Because I've called all the cards I have. So that concludes the testimony on this item. Do we have any comments by staff?
Wanted to get, yeah, I mean, I had questions for staff, but I think you just make the comments, you'll probably get to all my questions.
I thought it would maybe be helpful if the staff starts with three of the key issues that were raised. Coming back first to the sweeping of the parking lots. Secondly, the voluntary substitution of alternative housekeeping methods and EO approval, and how one would deal with a disagreement with the executive officer's decision if there was such a disagreement. And third, this definition of primary cause. What I'd like to do is have the staff respond to the first two and have council respond on the third, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that the board has regarding other issues.
So in regard to the first issue on sweeping, the rule requires that the sweeping be once per operating shift. And we have an ambient monitor. It's a district ambient monitor at one of the larger battery manufacturing facilities. And we have seen elevated levels of the ambient concentration. And so one of the arguments is, in terms of the need, well, we don't need to because we haven't seen these ambient concentrations. The reason why we haven't seen it at the other facilities is we don't have monitors there. But with the one facility that we do have it, in that particular facility, the monitor was moved, and the monitor was moved because it was located at a neighbor facility, and the neighbor didn't want the monitor at that facility. And the new location may not be as, capturing necessarily the maximum ground level concentration. But the bottom line is that that facility where the monitor is located does sweeping and cleaning of their paved areas, multi-times through the day. Definitely once per operating shift. A number of the facilities do conduct cleaning of their areas that goes beyond Rule 1420. And so if we establish a standard that's less than, that is weekly, we're going back to 1420, and we're allowing facilities to roll back what they've been doing. A number of these facilities are doing it on a daily or more frequently than daily, and the facility that has the monitor is doing it on a multi-time, 3 times, a minimum of 3 times per day.
So Susan, let me just add to that, and then we'll go on to the next issue. So as Susan just mentioned, these facilities are under Rule 1420 currently. That requires weekly. In the board's decision in Rule 1420.1, which applies to Exide and Quemeco, the board established do it per shift. So the industry proposal is status quo. The staff's proposal is to reflect what has been the past board decision regarding the importance of sweeping relative to fugitive emissions. And in the case of, for example, parking lots adjacent to administrative buildings, we've put in different provision for that so that it would be once per week. So we know that the fugitives are important, and as Susan just mentioned, many of the, not many, but a number of the companies are already doing a higher frequency of sweeping than the once per week.
The other,
So, go to the issue number 2, Susan.
I also just wanted to add one more point on the sweeping, is that they're saying sweeping of the parking lots. 8 of the 13 facilities have parking lots that border their operation sides of their building. And so by eliminating sweeping in parking lots, we would be eliminating some critical paved areas where you have bay doors and openings that go right out to the parking lot areas. In regards to the alternative housekeeping measures, and the Metals Coalition commented, and also from the Battery Council, we added a provision in 1420.2 that allows a facility to substitute any measure, housekeeping measure, provided it meets the same objective of the measure they're replacing and the same, that is as effective or more effective than the measure it's replacing. It's standard practice for the district to pre-approve when you're going to substitute a requirement in the rule. And so we're asking the facility to, it could be as simple as an email to us that they meet the objective and the effectiveness, but we want to have that ability for the executive officer to approve those measures before they use it. A facility could decide on their own that 1, 2, 3, or many measures of the housekeeping provisions meet the objective or the efficiency of the measures, and maybe they don't, and that's our concern. The substitution of a measure, if they disagree with the executive officer, they can appeal that to the hearing board, and so there's a process that's already in place. I think if we give up that pre-approval, that's, our concern is, that's a standard practice that we have in many of our existing rules and regulations.
And so, as Susan's mentioning, it's not only a standard practice, but in other instances, companies have an option of appealing to the hearing board if for any reason I've made an improper decision, and that process has worked well. So if we could now turn to council on the issue of the definition of primary cause and why there's a difference between the staff proposed definition and the industry's proposed definition.
The first thing I want to point out is that there is an out presently in the rule, in the proposed rule, for a facility that isn't the primary cause of a lead exceedance. And that provision was put in there to address an industry concern. The definition of primary cause that's currently in the rule says that a facility that isn't the most significant contributor to an exceedance isn't responsible for the exceedance. What the industry is essentially asking for is to gut the rule. They want a definition. They have proposed a definition that says that if there's any other contributor of lead to an exceedance, then they're completely off the hook. That obviously would render the lead standard in the rule a dead letter. So for that reason, we suggest that you not adopt the industry definition of primary.
So the definition actually is in the staff report. We could put that Kurt's explained. The staff could put the staff proposed definition, or the board could put that definition in the rule, number one.
That would probably be a good idea.
Okay.
It's a little more, a lot more clear with the council's definition of that. Supervisor Benoit?
Could I just clarify one last thing on this particular issue?
Staff's taken longer than all the testimony we had.
Well, the industry raised the issue of they have 5 days to submit their, information that there's been another cause of the exceedance. We would certainly not object to 14 days to give them some additional time.
Supervisor, go ahead.
Thank you. This is an important rule. It's a serious health hazard. We've heard about lead and how it impacts human health for a long time. those can't be denied, and I certainly support the need to try and move in an area where we can to reasonably eliminate those threats. And I want to say I appreciate the efforts of staff. A couple of you went with me down to Corona to visit that facility. And we've made many adjustments, and some of that's been reflected here today in the comments and some support from the industry, good support from a lot of the industry on the rule as it's drafted today. So the concern I have are the ones that were brought up by the industry that still remain, and the biggest one being the sweeping concern. You know, we have, with this rule, invoked many additional changes, and I would expect we already have some of the cleanest plants of this type around, and maybe in the world. They are going to get even better with the other changes we've made within these rules. And as a result, I'm not convinced that the amount of material that's leaving the plant and ending up in the parking lot really justifies going from once a week to 21 times a week, which is what this rule currently proposes. I am happy to see that we've got a little more robust socioeconomic analysis. I've been asking for that for quite some time. On page 6 of the staff report, it says the proposed rule is expected to result in approximately 140 jobs foregone annually between 2016 and 2035. Pretty simple statement, pretty dramatic impact. That's a lot of families without jobs that could be employed. And so I think we've got to constantly balance that when we make rule analysis here. Batteries are an important part of everybody's life. They're probably going to get more important. The batteries being manufactured here are used in everything from forklifts to golf carts to cars. We're all going to need them. If we tighten the rules so much that the manufacturing of that goes overseas or maybe just 100 miles south of here, then we're transporting those batteries from our needs here in the valley or the basin to other places and then bringing them back. And the transportation of that lead, that very heavy product, has implications on the health of everybody. And I'm not sure that we fully analyze that even when we talk about 120 jobs. So we've got to be reasonable when we take these standards on, and I think, again, it's a very good step. We're making great progress in reducing lead in the areas of these plants, which is admittedly a small piece of the total lead that our society is, in our area is subjected to. But I think that the other changes we make are going to dramatically reduce the lead coming out of the plants. That will presumably dramatically reduce whatever small amount of dust there might have been in the outside areas, in addition to which we've added perimeter monitoring through this rule to continue to show that the overall outside effects have been minimized, and we believe they have been, and the industry has accepted both those internal checks and the perimeter monitoring. So with all of that in mind, I would recommend and I would move that we approve the rule, but with the two changes that I would like to make. And one would be, let's move to twice a week instead of once a week in the outside areas. And secondly, the industry has a concern about this. Whether may I make this change that we think is going to improve the course of the actions inside. Instead of making that, you submit it, and when we get around to it, we tell you it's okay. I would recommend that we require that they notify us, and they can implement those changes unless they're notified within 7 days that there's a problem.
Second.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I have before, I'd like to ask a question of staff. When we talk about sweeping the parking lots, are we talking about doing that only if the plant has exceeded the ambient emissions that is allowable? And are we talking about that it's already outside of the plant, and that is the amount of emissions that now is going to be landing in the parking lot, that exceedance? Because if it's less than that, and I agree with Supervisor Benoit, maybe it's not necessary so frequently, But if it's that or above, then we are really allowing that amount of emissions to be in the parking lot, and it's being accumulated over some period of time. It seems to me that we should have some quantifiable basis in order to determine exactly when that is triggering for sweeping, not just an arbitrary number. Because if someone is only doing, you know, .01, is that really equivalent to someone who's doing .17 or 1.8? That is far in excess of that. So could you comment on that?
Yes, Dr. Parker, the provision we're discussing is a provision that is a preventative measure to decrease the lead emissions that would be coming from the facility. And again, it is modeled after the board's previous policy. And one of the issues that we're addressing is to help ensure that they don't go over the threshold at the monitor that is established in the rule. But secondly, the accumulation of lead dust over an extended period of time, albeit each year maybe being at a smaller amount, causing contamination of soil and surfaces in adjacent facilities. For example, we have a situation where there's going to be construction at a property adjacent to Exide, and now Exide, they convinced Exide to come in and actually clean their property up before they do the construction because of dust that may have settled on their property. So, you know, we're trying to prevent those sorts of issues. And in terms of the frequency, you know, I certainly understand Supervisor Benoit's concerns as he articulated them. And if we can get the rule approved and that's a change that the board wants to make, then, you know, it's appropriate, and let's get the rule adopted and get on to other things.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question of staff? I want to understand, you were citing to data in terms of the need for the frequency of the sweeping. Can you explain exactly what data you collected and why that led you to propose more frequent sweeping requirement?
The frequency of sweeping was based on Rule 1420.1, which required sweeping once per operating shift. And when we know when they sweep once per operating shift, that the ambient levels that they were able to achieve, the 0.15 and the 0.10. Do you want to?
I think we'll also note that the rule requires a compliance plan so that if the ambient monitors go above the trigger, then they have to come back with additional measures. So part of
that would be one of the measures that would be considered.
And that's one of the reasons I was comfortable with the supervisor's request.
Then I would suggest there was one other change that you recommended was the 14 days to respond. I would ask that the maker of the motion consider adopting Barry's request that allow them the extra days to respond.
I'm sorry. I intended to include that in my motion and do so now.
Did the second intend to include that?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any further, yes, I'm sorry, Supervisor, you were way down there at the end.
I know, and we're not curved. You can't see me today.
Right, all these guys blocking you out.
I mentioned earlier in my comments in the white papers, this idea that I'd like the board to take up, that when we're asking companies to make substantial capital investment, in order for them to do that, they need to have some predictability about how long that investment is going to be good. And they don't, I think we've heard from a lot of very good corporate citizens today who want to reduce lead emissions and who want to do the right thing. They also want to know that they're going to have jobs here for their employees and for our constituents. Our staff report talks about the investment that Gerdau, who we heard from, will be making, $5.1 million annually. I suspect it's probably going to be upwards of that, given that this is our number and not theirs. But you heard in their testimony and read in their letter, they're planning on becoming perhaps the cleanest steel mill in the country. And that's something that I think this district can be very proud of having partnered with them on. The investment that they're going to be making is of such a substantial nature, as are so many of the investments we ask our corporate partners to make. We need to, either in this policy or as a separate measure by this board, talk about our policy for how long our rules apply when somebody's made that kind of capital investment, and give them some certainty that if they make this investment, the rule's going to apply for the life of that investment, and that we're not going to pull the rug out from under them in 2 years with something different. And I know that's a complicated concept and is probably going to need a lot of work, but I think it goes a long way toward making sure that we get companies that invest in the right thing and will stay here and keep their jobs here while working toward the public health that we all hold so important.
Dr. Parker and Supervisor Nelson have been beating that drum for probably a year and a half, and
I'm glad to join them.
Yeah, right. I happen to be a member of that club because when I was in business, I knew that when I made a capital expenditure, I had to figure out how long I could count on before I recovered the cost of it. So I think we got to figure this out. We have to figure this out. And it's difficult for government to figure it out because government doesn't think like business, and that's, so that's why I'm pleased to have some electeds on here that understand what business people go through. It's not, business people always looked at it as the enemy. We're not the enemy, but we're trying to operate a business. So I'm sure that there are a number of, as you say, our corporate partners who are going to be affected by our rules. And let me tell you, it transcends the whole rule base. I would be open to any suggestion. I'm tired of no action on this item, Okay, I'm open to any suggestions on way to tackle this or approach it that's possible. Supervisor
Dr. Burke.
Nelson, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to roll on there.
I was going to just suggest that Supervisor Rutherford had commented earlier on the white papers that the AQMP would be a good context for trying to address this issue because it will be the forerunner of the future regulations by the board. And so I just would like to express to the board that I think the AQMP would be a good process.
Which is great, but it doesn't help Gerdau today, and we need to give them some certainty today if they're going to make a $40 million investment.
They're prepared to make that investment no matter what.
Yeah,
They've indicated their willingness and readiness to make that investment already, but I understand the concern, and I think this particular rulemaking isn't the forum in which we can solve this problem of stranded costs, but it has certainly come up in the past.
And in the case of this particular company, it isn't just compliance with this rule, but the compliance with this rule will help them comply with another provision in state law, the toxic hotspot program, where they're required to implement a risk reduction plan. So how you parse that out and not run afoul of what's required in AB 2588 should they implement certain things and then still need additional things according to state law. This is a really complex issue, so I think it takes
But couldn't you
time.
always say, that we would not move to make an adjustment unless forced by either federal or state law?
That might do it. I think Supervisor Nelson might have some thoughts on it.
Supervisor Nelson, you've been so patient.
I'd just like to report back that parking was very ample at headquarters this morning.
Yeah, I didn't.
In case anybody wondered, I pulled right up, got an electric charge station, and
I want you to know I didn't rat you out either.
Oh, I'm sorry, on this issue. No, thank you. I do believe we should support the rule change today, and I think that we heard some very good things, and this has been a common theme. But I think the important thing for this agency is to look at this concept just from an ethical standpoint and not constantly start with the idea, well, we can't commit to anything because we could be in a bind and we wouldn't be able to meet the law. You know, there are two ways to approach something. One is to constantly find reasons that you never even get started, which seems to have been the way we've typically approached it. Or how about, this is our preferred outcome. We embrace being the home of the cleanest steel rebar manufacturing facility in the entire United States. And we encourage that. And we want to try to provide stability, so maybe we'll have the cleanest version of every industry at some point. And if we show them we will support them, they're more likely to want to go extend themselves rather than fold their tents. Some of these agencies in different arenas probably get very close, and I can name several who decided, I can't play here, because I would have made the investment today, but I know there's going to be another one coming in 5 years. I'm all in. I'm out. We owe it to this agency to get the most out of our business community by at least showing them that our approach is to embrace protecting them if they extend themselves. We all know the law is going to change, but as you heard today, this is a very small portion of the overall exposure for this basin of lead anyway. So the idea that, for example, Gerdau and Gerdau alone is going to get us into a new standard, if it were to be another standard in yet 5 to 10 years, isn't actually the case. We have a lot of tools, and one of them certainly is that our agency would help just to make up a Gerdau. If we were to be hit with a new standard in 10 years, then maybe we would share some of the obligation to help offset the costs that they left stranded. I don't know that we could, but we certainly could indicate that we would look, if we ask you to extend yourself and we come back in 7 years on a 25-year payback and find that you're the person that we have to go hit up, perhaps our agency will help. And there's 1,000 reasons that we can't help anybody. But I'd rather be the agency that starts with, I think we can help you. Our intention is to protect your investment, and we all know the world's a changing place, but we're not going to start with the first excuse. We're not even going to go there because, you know, the law's always subject to change. We could need something else from you later. That's the whole point. That's their fear. If you need something, tell us.
So Supervisor Nelson, I'm sorry if I somehow implied that we were just trying to avoid the issue. What I'm trying to work through with the board as to how to best address the issue. And since this company provides a good example of someone who acquired a facility, is investing significantly in the facility, maybe the proper thing to do here is, because the board needs analysis, public needs to understand and participate in the discussion, is simply for us, because we've established a good working relationship with this company, to look at it as a case study of what could be done as a potentially broader policy, and bring back the case study to the board and discuss it with the board, and then have the board establish some broader policy guidelines.
And I would hope that in the interim, the company and its board has heard the intent of many of this board, that we want you to make the investment and we want to find a way to make sure that that investment lasts for many, many years, both for you, your employees, and for our communities.
Mr. Chairman? Yes. As chairman of the stationary source, I'm probably more aware of how tight we've got the stationary source stakeholders screwed to the ground, that they can't move because we're not getting any assistance from EPA or CARB on the mobile polluters. The question raised by Mr. Campbell about him wanting to increase his throughput to do business in Europe and Asia, how do they do that, Barry? How do they increase their throughput when we are lowering the ambient numbers on a company like that?
So again, you know, I don't want to speculate on one side or the other. That would be something that we would have to sit down and go through with them to understand by how much and what effects that has on what equipment and what provisions, if any, would create any
Well,
sort of
that's a problem
concern.
with most of the stationary businesses. They really don't want to increase the throughput because they're going to go above the ambient level. And with the economy picking up the way it is, a lot of these stakeholders can't take advantage of the increase in demand for the product.
We actually have a good number of permits that come through the agency where folks are increasing the throughput. And sometimes it's an issue and other times it's not. I just signed permits, actually I'm signing them today, that increase the throughput at a facility.
It's a very cogent question. Mayor Polito?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would propose that possibly we set up an ad hoc committee that can work on this policy that we're talking about. You know, something that'll find a way to encourage industry, yet, protect industry. You know, we've seen so many of our industry leave, because of the large investments that they've made, that they've been unable to really, follow through on. And so I know it's complicated. I know our job is to regulate. But if we can regulate in such a fashion that we can balance things out, I think that'd be very appropriate. I know there's several board members that have spoken up on this, and if you should so choose, I'd be happy to serve on that ad hoc committee and work with industry, and let's try to, maybe we build this as a case study, but we come up with a policy that will take this into account on a go-forward basis, Mr. Chair.
I think this is probably one of the most important items that we're going to deal with in the near term. So any of the board members who are interested in serving on a committee like that, please talk to me after the board meeting. And yes, sir, I knew you'd be number one on my list, and number one in my heart. So I think that we ought to put together a committee and go at it and sit down with staff and just hammer something out. And I think it's long overdue. Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any further comment?
Dr. Burke, could I just make sure that we're
I'm
clear?
sorry?
I just want to make sure we're clear on the motion at the staff
With the
table.
amendment by Supervisor Benoit, or addition.
Yeah, so Supervisor was going to twice a week sweeping, and on the voluntary substitution of alternative housekeeping that they submitted to us, and then we have 7 days to tell them yay or nay. And then it would be...
And clarify further, that if they don't hear from you within 7 days,
Right.
it's approved.
No, we have to, right, I understand. And they would have 14 days to appeal a violation at the monitor due to other sources. And then Vice Chairman Yates suggested that we take the staff primary cause definition that was in the staff report and move it into the rule.
And I would include that in my motion.
Okay, great. Thank you.
The second?
Yes. So now we're straight on the motion, and we have a second?
Yeah, we do with Supervisor Nelson.
Is there any opposition to this? Hearing none, this item is approved. Moving to item 34.
Mass exodus.
Philip Fine, Deputy Executive Officer, Planning Rules, AQMD. We're waiting for the presentation to come up. There we go. So I'll try to be brief. I know we're all hungry, but so this is a proposed rule amendment and a proposed rescinding of a rule, because in essence we're combining what is now 1106 and 1106.1. And the primary reason we're combining that is for clarity, because there has been some confusion when it comes to compliance and enforcement, because these are very similar codings in these two different distinct uses, and codings could be, in some cases, used for either. So we're trying to clarify that by putting it all in one rule. In essence, the rule was adopted back in 1988, 1106, and last amended in 1995. So these are quite old rules, and as I mentioned, it has caused some confusion for end users about which VOC limits apply for different uses. The proposed amendment was largely administrative. Again, it's rescinding and subsuming 1106.1 into 1106, which with some other amendments. We also need to align some of our VOC limits with EPA's control technology guidelines as required. We're adding and we're updating the rule with provisions that are very similar to other coatings rules and other product rules that we've amended in recent years in terms of prohibitions for possession, other specifications, sales rule language, and things like that. But again, these are mostly just updates because this rule has not been amended in quite some time. We're also adding some transfer efficiency requirements as per some other rules. We are adding reporting provisions, which I'll get into, some record-keeping provisions, and some other minor amendments, editorial corrections, and removing obsolete rule language as necessary. So some issues have come up, and I think you'll find that we've largely responded to those issues. And I know this is hard to read, but I'll try to go over them briefly. There was a misunderstanding from RadTech, the energy curable coating industry, about an exemption that's currently in Rule 109 for record-keeping requirements for low VOC coatings. And it was thought that it wasn't clear that when we were referring to Rule 109 in this proposed amendments to 1106, they were also referring to those exemptions in 109. So we were clear in our staff report that all the exemptions in 109 still apply. We're not removing those exemptions. We're still providing that incentive for low VOC coatings, as was discussed earlier today. Another request from RadTech was to include a definition for the VOC content of energy curable materials, thin film energy curable materials. We added that as well. And there were a couple other issues came up with very specific uses, some military specs for submarines, as well as something at Disneyland. They have slightly larger pleasure craft that would have wanted a marine coating. So we added some provisions to accommodate that. Another thing that came up was the transfer efficiency requirements that some highly viscous coatings may not get through the high pressure guns. So high volume, low pressure guns. So we added an exemption for high viscosity fluids, which would also help the RadTech's industry as well. So the only thing it comes down to is this last thing on reporting for the industry. Now, again, the record keeping for the end user, they are exempt if it's a low VOC coating. This is just for the manufacturer. What we're proposing is reporting requirements for the manufacturer, very similar to many of our other rules that have implemented reporting requirements for the manufacturer. And this we don't feel this provides a disincentive at all to the end user to use these products. There's other incentives to use these low VOC products, but this is not a disincentive because we're only asking the manufacturer to give us some information. And specifically what we're asking for is that their product data sheets include certain information, that they have certain labeling requirements, and that they report to us for only 3 years their annual quantity of sales and emissions. And this is very similar to our architectural coating rules and some other rules we'll be bringing forward in the coming years. And it has been a very successful program in getting our inventory straight, learning about industry trends, learning how and where the low VOC coatings are being used, and it feeds back to us how we can further incentivize this. So all we're asking are these pretty basic reporting requirements. We're only asking for 3 years. We're not asking for any fees, just so we can get a sense of where the low VOC products, including energy curable products, are being used in this industry. And up till now, we have not been able to find any examples of it being used in the marine coating or pleasure craft industry. Doesn't mean it couldn't happen in the future, but if we can find some applications, then maybe in the future we can lower VOC limits or we can have incentive programs. But until we have that information, which we have essentially zero right now, we can't move forward with that. So we think these are modest requirements. It does not provide a disincentive. The only other requirement is giving us a list of their distributors in the South Coast Basin. Again, very similar to other rules that we have, and this is something that they should have on hand anyway. We hold things confidential, just like in our other rules. So that's really the only issue we're aware of is this final record keeping, not record keeping, reporting requirement by manufacturers. And staff just feels like if we can get that information, we can use it to further incentivize these types of products in this category. Thank you.
On this item. Would Carol Kaufman and Douglas DeLong please come to the microphone?
Good morning, Chairman Burke, members of the Governing Board. My name is Carol Kaufman, and I'm with Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. We appreciate the opportunity to provide comments on the proposed amended Rule 1106 for marine coatings. Metropolitan is the nation's largest provider of treated drinking water, delivering water to 26 public member agencies who in turn provide water to more than 19 million people throughout 6 counties. Our extensive water system includes the Colorado River Aqueduct, 16 hydroelectric facilities, 819 miles of pipeline, 5 water treatment plants, and 9 reservoirs. To support Metropolitan's operations, we own small watercraft that are used for inspection, sampling, and maintenance activities at our freshwater reservoir plants and reservoirs. The particular aspect of Rule 1106 on which we worked with staff is to recognize the coating application methodology needed to spray low VOC, high solids coatings. We thank staff for their efforts to include the viscosity-based exemption from the traditional transfer efficiency requirements. The provision will facilitate the application of the high solids coatings while benefiting from the low VOC content of the materials. We look forward to working with staff in future rulemaking to amend other coating rules to incorporate similar beneficial provisions for applications. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. DeLong?
Chairman, Board, I'm Doug DeLong with DDU Enterprises in Redondo Beach, California. Thank you for letting me speak today. I want to open with a line right out of the final report here that says the proposed administrative amendment is not expected to yield any additional VOC reductions or increases. Its underlying industry has already compliant products available that can meet the VOC limits in this proposal. So, as a businessman, I want to know, what good is this going to do the business people? I just was in Mexico yesterday at a plant that employs 800 people that used to be employed here in Los Angeles that left because of stuff that staff put on them, and they said, fine, we're leaving. I'm here for the small businessman to say, please, you don't need this. This is a ridiculous, more paperwork, more wasted time, more structure, more chances of proprietary information getting leaked out. These formulators all make products for specific needs for specific companies, and they really don't need to have all that information out in the public domain. I know your previous staff member said that it would be confidential, but judges make things confidential. Your staff doesn't make things confidential. And I just think it's time for the South Coast Air Quality Management District to really look at how much do you need to get into someone's business. That with the federal government and the state, as a businessman, I'm spending more and more time filling out forms, and this is just more forms. And do you think for a minute that the formulators or and the distributors are not going to pass the cost of compliance for this form on to the end user, my customers, and me, the manufacturer? So it's just not this is kind of a Pollyanna thing. We need to know all this information. But in reality, I don't really think you do. And I think as a manufacturer in Southern California, it's so hard to do business here now. And just last week, I used to ship things to Riverside, Irvine, all over California. Last week, I shipped to Singapore, Ireland, Mexico. I mean, nothing was going to California, nothing. And it used to all go to California. And the reason it's not is because of, you know why.
It's really, really interesting that you came this morning, because I was just, as the lady was testifying, I was just saying to Supervisor Antonovich that about 20 years ago, Mrs. Fuhrer came to testify on this rule. And I, at that time, was a boat owner and an avid boat owner. I lived on my boat practically. And so this woman who was coming to testify against the rule thought that I was using high lead-based paint on the bottom of my boat. So she sent a team down to the marina to have them check with, I don't know if you know John DeRocco or not, but John does the bottom painting of my boat in those days. And I was using illegal stuff. But when I went down to Cabo, I took my boat down to Cabo, the boats were lined up at the yard down in Cabo San Lucas. They couldn't get them in the yard because they were painting them with that
Copper.
right.
Yeah.
You know, so I've seen firsthand what this does, and I believe what you're saying. And it's you know, it's because from your perspective, it's because you're selling. From my perspective, it was because I was buying, and I wanted the product. So I didn't have all that, those barnacles and all that stuff on the bottom of my boat. Couldn't get it.
It's a complex issue. I'm
telling
just
you.
here fighting for the little manufacturers and the fact that if you've got a line in your staff report that this is not expected to yield any VOC reductions, what are we here for? VOC reductions, aren't we? Isn't that what?
That's what it's
Isn't
about.
isn't that your job? If this will not do that, then this is toilet paper to me. It's not anything worth you voting on with a yes vote, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
About 5 minutes. Yes, sir.
You know, I had another issue with this, and I think Mr. DeLong has probably highlighted it. On page 6 of the staff report, it says, this proposed amendment codifies existing practices of marine and pleasure craft coating operations and subject to Rule 1106 and 1106.1. As such, there will be no additional costs or other socioeconomic impacts anticipated. I think he just identified some additional costs and some socioeconomic impacts, and even if it's just, we think, a little stronger requirement on reporting, more forms to be filled out, there is an impact, and it should be part of our decision-making process. So maybe staff wants to address why they would forego any socioeconomic analysis.
Again, this is Philip Fine. We realize that the rule, as it amended, is not intended to get VOC reductions. This is a clarification, and it was an administrative rule because we were having some confusion by end users, and there were some enforcement issues, not just in our district, but in other districts that came up. So we were bringing this in line with the way that other districts have handled similar rules to make it more clear about which limits would be applicable for which uses. And we thought having it in one rule with similar definitions was gonna solve that problem and make it easier for manufacturers, but mostly end users, to know, what's compliant, what's not compliant, and what they can do. So it's not unusual that we'll bring a rule back to make fixes like that, to make it more enforceable, to make it more understandable to the public. The changes that in record keeping and reporting, the record keeping doesn't change, but the reporting is again what other coating manufacturers are doing, and there have been no comments on this reporting requirement until very recently, maybe the last week. There's been no comments on the record-keeping requirements. We've had several working group meetings. The reporting in terms of costs, I think the manufacturers know who they're selling to, know how much they sell, and know the VOC content, and that's all we're asking for. So we don't think that's an inordinate burden to just give us that information, the same way that all architectural coating manufacturers are providing us today, and there's other rules too that are either going to consider that or already require that. And we're not requiring it in perpetuity. We're just doing it for 3 years so staff can get a handle on what is being used out there and if there's any other compliance issues or incentivizing low VOC coating. So costs were negligible when it came to just providing that information to us once a year.
Well, as a protagonist, in a basin of, how many million people do we have in here?
Nearly 17.
17 million, How much VOC emissions are we getting from boat bottom painting?
Dr. Burke, it's pretty low, and we're not going after this category to get additional reductions either. We are trying to make clarifications and making the rules simpler for end users to understand. And part of it is getting a better handle on what that number is through just 3 years of simple reporting, because we don't have exact numbers, because we don't have the data to do so.
Well, I was a no vote 20 years ago.
Yeah, but this is fixing some of those problems.
Yeah.
It's administrative change is necessary to fix those problems.
But you look at our guys get paid for making the rules, to ask the questions, to make you fill out the paperwork. But the guy who's selling the stuff, who's a small business guy, he doesn't have a person that's filling out the forms. No, normally, in my case, I was lucky. I had Marie Patrick. So when the forms come, hey, go fill them out. But if it wasn't for her, I would have been absolutely insane. So when he comes in and waves a big pack of papers, I understand exactly what he's talking about. I don't want to waste your time, but in the city of Los Angeles, there's a city sports tax. It's like a business tax, okay?
Just for the marathon, right?
Nobody ever heard of it, okay? I get a guy tromp in my office one day and says, UOX number of dollars. Why is that? There's a business sports tax. Who pays it? There was not a single other entity in the city of Los Angeles, including the Los Angeles Dodgers, because they got a waiver. See, they got a waiver.
Smart guys.
Yeah, right. So I wasn't so smart because I never got a waiver. But I mean, anyway, to my colleagues.
Despite your objections, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move the staff's proposal, and given the limitations of the 3 years reporting,
there's
it's
another
reasonable.
public comment.
Oh, Rita, I'm so sorry. You did have a card in.
Yes,
I'm sorry, I got carried away and I just neglected you. Please.
no problem, no problem. Rita Loof with BradTech. As has been stated, Rule 1106 is not about emission reductions. The proposal before you today is about red tape. Call it record keeping, call it reporting. In the business community, we call it red tape. The average VOC limit in the rule is 464 grams per liter. Our materials have less than 50 grams per liter. Our manufacturers are voluntarily providing the district with an extra 400 grams per liter of VOC reductions, and yet they're still subjected to the overly prescriptive reporting requirements in 1106. This rule is regulation for the sake of regulating. The administrative reporting requirements in Section G of the rule are expansive and include a compliance statement requirement for each individual coating, coating component, and ready-to-spray mixture. Additional labeling requirements, annual quantity emission reports, which shall include the annual sales or distribution volume. Our manufacturers would be required to submit a list of all U.S. distributors to whom they supply, including but not limited to private label coatings and toll manufacturer coatings. There's a real cost to this additional reporting. These added requirements act as a barrier to doing business in Southern California. Staff argues that reporting is needed to develop an inventory for low VOC coatings, but there are other ways of doing that without creating barriers for the very coatings that are a solution to the problem. The district currently has sufficient records from UVEB facilities who have to retain records to prove that the exemptions apply. And then, of course, there's the internet. And by the way, your staff did include a web page from a UV marine coating. It's in the staff report. Staff also argues that the reporting requirements are the same for every industry. Under that logic, we should have the same requirements for diesel trucks as we have for electric cars. We are the electric car of the coating industry. The exemption for materials with viscosity greater than 650 centipoise, although well-intended, is not helpful. There's a cost to new equipment. The viscosity of Mazola corn oil is 100 CPS. Motor oil viscosity is 500 centipoise. Imagine spraying these materials through an HVLP gun. In comparison, the current exemption in Rule 1168 is 200 CPS or greater, a more reasonable number. There's definitely going to be a cost of complying with this. We heard staff's concern that a blanket exemption could be problematic and would agree to a limit of 50 grams per liter. We respectfully request an exemption for energy-curable coatings that contain less than 50 grams per liter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a motion and a second. I think we should take a roll call because I think I'm going to be at least one no vote.
There might be at least two.
Okay.
Three.
So where's the clerk? Want to call the roll?
Supervisor Rutherford?
Nay.
Excuse me, was that a yes or no? Nay.
No.
Okay.
No, nay, thumbs down. Not
Mayor
interested.
Benoit? Mayor Benoit?
Nay.
Supervisor Benoit?
No.
Dr. Liu?
Aye.
Supervisor Antonovich?
No.
Dr. Burke?
No.
Mayor Yates?
No.
Councilman Cantriati?
Yes.
Supervisor Nelson?
No.
Dr. Parker?
No.
Motion fails 8-2.
Oh, what a surprise. Okay.
I need to recuse myself.
With my colleagues allow me, we have an assembly member here for public comment, so I'd like to take him out of order if you would allow me. And Assembly Member Sebastian Ridley Thomas, would you come to the microphone? Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the board for allowing me to go out of order. It's good to see all of you. I simply join you to salute you and your staff for your work with the newly created legislative entity called the Los Angeles Caucus. As many of you may be aware, we have about 39 people that represent portions of Los Angeles County that serve in the legislature. And often we haven't really banded together to do much that benefits the region. And we know what benefits Los Angeles benefits greater Los Angeles, and many of the areas that you represent that are not physically in LA County, but certainly connected because this is a mega region. We've received your staff, Leisha Smith, I think at our first meeting, and she did an excellent job representing the AQMD's perspectives there. Since then, we've come up with a couple of priorities that we would like to partner with you on, and certainly want to hear feedback, and we'll have communication in writing and the like. to indicate as much, two of which are important, transportation and water, that the caucus is going to focus on as a group, and we're going to try to work by consensus and build it regionally to see if we can do things to make sure that the state is a better actor and a better partner with localities on water, transportation. The third is homelessness, which is not as much an AQMD direct responsibility, but I know that we all care about. So simply wanted to come and give you an update, salute your work. Thank you for your service on behalf of the people of the 54th Assembly District and my colleagues across Greater Los Angeles. Thank you, Dr. Burke.
Oh, no, our pleasure. Before he put on his glasses, Mike thought you were your dad.
Not quite as good looking, not quite as good looking yet.
I want everybody to know I went to watch this young man play high school football. He wasn't bad either.
Go
Even though it
Cubs,
was tough
Loyola
to
High
tell
School.
him between his brother at the time.
Thank you, Dr. Burke.
Thank you. Okay, item 34?
35.
Five.
Mr. Chairman.
Item 35.
I need to disclose.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the item.
Hold on a second. I need to
said hold
disclose conflicts and leave the room before you take any action on this item, please. I'm recusing myself from agenda item number 35 because Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority and Port of Long Beach are potential sources of income and materially affected by this item. So just give me a chance to get out of the room, and then go ahead. Thank you.
Dr. Burke, this is to receive $2 million.
I move the item.
Second.
Okay. Do we have any board member travel? None?
I had some this morning.
Yeah, right. We mean intended. Board member travel. Okay, then, would Mr. Weiss send us to closed session?
It is necessary for the board to recess the closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9A and 54956.9D4 to consider initiation of litigation, one case.
Can we please have everyone exit the room for closed session?
the district if they webcast that part. Now, what did I do with my paper?
We have to wait for Kurt anyways.
Like after Hitchcock. Yeah, fine. Oh, yeah, that's right.
There were no reportable actions taken in closed session. The meeting is adjourned.